I'm Coach Prasick for the Empower Project. Have you ever been involved in a conversation and you express an opinion about something and someone rebukes you and says, "No, you are not to judge"? Well, is that true? Literally, we are not to judge. We are not to have an opinion, or if we do, it is invalid and violates a scriptural mandate that we are not to judge. Well, I think if we're all going to get along, whether we are believers or unbelievers, or regardless of what faith we subscribe to, I think if we're going to be civilized to get along with each other, I think we need to come to an agreement on what is meant by judge not. Let's take a look. The other day at work, I was in a conversation with a professing atheist, and I forget what the topic was, but obviously we reached a point of disagreement, and she reminded me of the scripture that says that I am not to judge. Well, I find it a little unusual that an atheist would be citing scripture to me, but nonetheless, let me ask you a question. What color is this pen? It's blue, isn't it? Okay. Right. That's a judgment. What color is this? It's orange. Right? Of course it is. Now, I could argue as a scientist that neither we don't know what color this pen is. What we do know is that it reflects a spectrum of light that the frequency of which, by consensus, is recognized generally as blue, or falls within the range of frequencies that we recognize as blue. In other words, truth is derived merely by consensus. So when you make the judgment that this is blue, it is very much questionable, but is also very much accepted. Well, there are other standards that are not quite so vague and quite so much based on consensus. For example, murder is wrong. I think we all agree on that, don't we? Well, why is murder wrong? Well, as a Christian, I would argue that in the Ten Commandments it says, "Thou shalt not do that." And as a Christian, we believe that there is an absolute truth. And anything that is outside of that absolute truth is therefore false or fiction and could perhaps be, evil. Where do we find that standard of truth? Well, in the canonized scripture, normally commonly referred to as the Holy Bible. However, even unbelievers subscribe to certain moral codes, and those moral codes are necessary to have a functional society or civilization. Well, okay, so are we to judge? I mean, the scripture says that, right? Do not judge. Well, let's look at what the scripture says and try to find out what is meant by what is said. The commonly cited verse, "Thou shalt not judge," is found actually in Matthew 7. It is contained in verses 1 through 3, and it opens up, "Do not judge," period. Right? No, that's not what it says. It says, "Do not judge, comma, or you will be judged. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Verse 3 says, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?" Well, I can certainly state emphatically that if you interpret that to mean do not judge under any circumstance, you would also have to agree that we are not to discern right from wrong, and if we do, we are not to express it, and if we do express it, our expression is invalid because we are not to judge. Obviously, that would be wrong. Okay? It seems to me that what is being called upon here is that we should not be hypocritical in our judgment. Nobody likes a hypocrite. Okay? I mean, can you imagine an obese person pointing out someone else's obesity, saying, you shouldn't be fat like that. It's bad for you. Well, they themselves are fat. That would not be credible. That would not be looked upon in favor. There are other things that are a little bit more serious, though. Okay? What about social issues that we face today? Legalization of marijuana. Is that right or is that wrong? Well, I could go to scriptures and say that we are not to be drunken, whether that be alcohol or some other substance, but then we could argue, what is drunkenness? What about abortion? It seems to me you should not kill. Well, then that presupposes that conception constitutes human life, and that point could be debated. I believe that life does begin at conception. And anything else, if we're wrong, we would need to err on the side of safety and protect the baby. But nonetheless, the purpose here is not to debate the individual issues. What framework, what guidelines does the Bible give us with regard to judgment, discerning right from wrong, and expressing that judgment or opinion or discernment? Let's go to John chapter 7, verse 24. Let's take a look there. It says, "Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly." I want to thank Wild Bill for America, my brother, who reminded me of this verse when I asked him about it, because if it were true that the intent of the scripture was not to judge, it would never say something like, "Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly." I think what we're being guided here is to judge and not be hypocritical, to hold ourselves to a higher standard and then raise those standards and try to get other people to subscribe to higher standards. And I think society and our culture overall would benefit. But the notion that I am not to judge because I'm a Christian is emphatically false. I am to discern as a Christian what is right and what is wrong. And I think for me to express that is well within the range. However, I would be wrong scripturally to judge hypocritically or errantly. So I think the Bible actually calls us to judge, not calls us not to, but it calls us to be careful and be good stewards of the truth when carrying out our judgment or expressing our opinion versus with regard to an obvious issue of right and wrong.